Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start out with a few comments here. The first thing I want to address is the safety of the military personnel responding to the Ebola crisis. The Joint Chiefs have made a recommendation to Secretary Hagel that he consider a regimented program of 21 days of controlled, supervised monitoring for all troops returning from Ebola response efforts in West Africa. The Secretary is in possession of that recommendation. He has made no decision yet. The Secretary shares the concerns by the chiefs about the safety and well-being not only of our troops but also of their families, and he appreciates the thoughtfulness and the gravity of the recommendations Chairman Dempsey sent to him. When a decision has been made, we will certainly let you know. In the meantime, the Secretary supports the decision made by Army leadership to place Major General Williams and his team under this same quarantine-like program. Now, if I could, I'd like to turn just briefly to events against ISIL. Over the last 24 to 36 hours, we've seen the Iraqi security forces and other anti-ISIL forces, such as the Peshmerga, make some gains in several parts of Iraq and Syria. In central Iraq, ISF operations to expand Iraqi control of territory beyond the Beji oil refinery are making progress. ISF is also advancing against ISIL in Amaria with the assistance of coalition airstrikes, and we've seen ISF achieve success in countering ISIL fighters in southwest Baghdad as well, or southwest of Baghdad as well, sorry. In addition, in northern Iraq, Peshmerga forces have regained control of Zumar, a town approximately 60 kilometers southwest of Mosul, and surrounding areas well inside operationally planned timelines. The operation has been planned for over a week, but objectives were achieved in a number of days. This is the fourth offensive operation in which Peshmerga forces have been able to regain control of ground from ISIL, including Mosul Dam, Zardek Mountain, and Rabia Gate. Finally, ISF, Kurdish, and coalition forces have targeted specific ISIL tactical locations to impede its ability to shoot, maneuver, communicate, and move near Mosul Dam, Zumar, Beji, and Baghdad. This has included the destruction of multiple fighting positions, at least 8 ISIL vehicles, to include an ISIL tank, a staging area, and a logistics base. While we recognize that a major Iraqi offensive against ISIL may still be a ways off, these are encouraging reports that highlight Iraq's determination to take the fight to ISIL. We continue to see that these combined targeting efforts are disrupting ISIL and forcing them to consider more changes in their tactics to try to avoid being targeted. Meanwhile, in Syria, the situation in Kobani remains tenuous, with ISIL continuing to put pressure on that city and anti-ISIL forces continuing to hold out. As U.S. Central Command's news release today pointed out, coalition airstrikes over the last 24 hours in Kobani destroyed several ISIL fighting positions and struck ISIL fighters. Despite these positive developments, it's important to point out that ISIL remains a very determined enemy. They continue to reinforce areas where they've been losing ground, such as in Kobani, Anbar province, and the vicinity of Mosul Dam. And they continue to threaten innocent civilians wherever they are. No one underestimates the challenges before us. As we've said from the outset, this campaign is going to be challenging and it's going to take time. Finally, I have one other piece of news to pass along. At the request of the government of Iraq, U.S. Air Force C-130 aircraft conducted an airdrop early on the morning of October 27th, Iraqi time, in the vicinity of Al-Assad Air Base to provide humanitarian aid for delivery by Iraqi security forces to members of Iraq's Abu Nimr tribe. U.S. aircraft delivered more than 7,000 halal meals, which were retrieved by the ISF and then delivered to the tribe, which had been recently relocated from their homes near Hit, Iraq, to flee ISIL aggression. The C-130 aircraft, which are deployed to U.S. Central Command area of responsibility, exited the airdrop zone safely. This assistance is just another example of our resolve to assist the people of Iraq and deny ISIL key terrain and safe haven, as well as our commitment to assist those forces who are opposing ISIL. And with that, I'll take your questions. Bob?
I wonder if on the Ebola recommendation from General Dempsey, whether you could flesh out a little bit how that would work in practice. Would it be uniform regardless of whether it was in the United States or anywhere abroad? And also in Vicenza, in that particular case, did the Italian government require that that be the step that be taken in that case?
I'm not aware of any requirement by the Italian government to do this. This was a decision by Army leadership in keeping with the recommendations that the Joint Chiefs floated up to the Secretary. On actual execution, I think there's still some homework to be done on that, Bob. I don't have any specifics for you on how that would work. Should the Secretary decide to implement it force-wide, I think there's still some spade work that needs to be done to to figure out all the eaches of that, and we're just not at that stage right now.
Is he seeking outside advice on before he decides how to do that?
I'm not aware of outside advice that he's seeking. I mean, he greatly values the opinions and recommendations of Chairman Dempsey and the chiefs as well. But he's going to take the time that he feels he needs to make a decision. And I think everybody understands the importance of that decision. And when he's ready, when he's made one, we'll let you know. Yeah.
Oh, on ISIS, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Just to make sure, could you clarify what's the status now, the situation at the Mosul Dam?
Well, I talked about it in my opening statement. The Mosul Dam, the facility, still is in control of Iraqi forces, Iraqi and Kurdish forces. It continues to be a target for ISIL. They continue to want to threaten it, but they have not successfully since they've been dislodged from it.
Okay. Now, with the broad picture that you have provided, that the Peshmerga and the Iraqi forces they are gaining ground in many areas, but in the same time, we heard in the past hours that even the Assad regime forces have gained ground close to Deir ez-Zor, at the border between Syria and Iraq, and also in the north near Aleppo. Do you have any information on that? How do you describe it?
I don't have any specific information about the Syrian regime and their operations. There's no doubt that the Assad regime continues to pressure opposition forces, continues to attack them. That's absolutely true. And we've said all along that his legitimacy to govern is gone, and that we're going to continue to work on this train and equip program to get a moderate opposition that can not only go against ISIL, but can work towards a political settlement inside Syria. But I don't have details on, Assad's military movements specifically.
Thank you.
Yeah, Phil.
Admiral, following up on your ISIL summary, you said there was some early encouraging progress against them in Iraq. But General Allen, when he was in Kuwait this week, talked about the importance of fighting them in the information space and having a propaganda effort to counter their social networking, like the video that's out from Kobani. Can you tell us what this department is doing on that score, and whether it's going to expand its efforts to fight against the information aspect of this terror campaign?
Well, we're obviously supporting the effort. It's an interagency effort as well as a cross-DOD kind of an effort. I won't get into, and I think you can understand why I wouldn't get into too much specifically about this, because this is there's a cyber component to this, and then there's also a messaging component to this, as in any kind of counter-propaganda work. So again, I really would be loath to get into too much detail from the podium, but I can tell you that we're taking it seriously, that the Department of Defense is contributing to an interagency effort to do this, and it will continue to do that. And we're very good in this realm. We're very flexible in this at these kinds of capabilities, and we're confident that over time we're going to be able to have an effect.
One other thing on Iraq, just real quick. OPCW says today that they have not been asked either by Baghdad or Washington to actually investigate these reports about ISIL chlorine gas attacks there. Can you tell us whether people in this department have decided not to ask them to do an investigation? You said last week DOD is not looking into it. Can you explain why you wouldn't ask them to see if the reports are accurate?
Well, let me take that for the record, Phil, and get back to you. I'm not aware of any decision that's been made here in the Defense Department to ask or not to ask OPCW to do it. What I said last week is that this is a typical OPCW function, not something that the Defense Department would normally do. But I owe you a better answer, so let me get back to you on that. Jesse.
Thanks. On the 21-day quarantine decision that Secretary Hagel has to make, in effect, hasn't the decision already been made for him with General Odierno's orders to quarantine these people already? It's already in practice. You said he supports it, so he's not going to reverse it, is he?
I'm not going to get ahead of a decision that the Secretary hasn't made yet, but no, it hasn't been made for the Secretary. The Secretary reserves the right to make this kind of decision, a policy decision for the entire Defense Department, for all our troops. And like I said, told Bob, he'll take the time necessary to make the decision, and then, like I said, we'll let you know what that is. But he supports the decision that was made by Army leadership to do this for General Williams and his team, and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, can you tell us why he supports the decision when the CDC says that, you know, the scientists working on this say, and in fact, that decision doesn't make sense and it's not the recommendation? Why does it make sense for the military when it doesn't make sense for the civilian?
This was the first group of U.S. military personnel that have come back from Liberia. It's the very first installment. I think the Secretary understands that Army leadership, supported by the recommendations of the Joint Staff, wanted to take a very conservative approach, particularly for this first group. And again, he understands that and didn't feel it was necessary to step in the way of it. But broadening it to the entire force and making a department-wide policy decision is something that he wants to take very seriously. And as I said, when he's had time to consider it, we'll let you know.
Clarification on that. So is he reviewing the Army decision, or will the Army decision stand and he is deciding whether to expand it to the other military services?
So let me try to do some forensics on this. So, you have a Joint Chiefs recommendation that went to the Secretary. In keeping with that recommendation, Army leadership made this decision because time was a factor here. These guys were coming out of Liberia right away. So I think using prudence, caution, and a conservative approach, Army leadership made this specific decision for General Williams and his staff. And it was in keeping with a recommendation that was working its way to the Secretary. That recommendation is now with the Secretary for him to consider doing it force-wide and to implement this across the force. He's got it, he'll examine it, and then we'll go from there. I mean, the decision was made as the recommendation was making its way up, because these individuals were at the time, at the time the recommendation was being proffered, they were actually traveling back from Liberia.
But what I'm asking is if he says, no, we're going to just go with the CDC guidelines, we're not going to do this force-wide, is General Williams then released, or does General Williams stay in his 21-day quarantine?
That's a hypothetical question, Julian, and I'm not good at that. But I don't foresee any plans to change the regimen for General Williams and his team at this time. I don't foresee that there'll be any change, regardless of what the Secretary decides, to the regimen that they're going through. Barb.
You keep saying that it's for General Williams and his team, but in fact, General Odierno's statement is all military, all Army personnel, all of them coming out of West Africa, not just General Williams and his team, will be subjected to 21 days of controlled monitoring. So this is already a very broad program. And you also have Air Force personnel as well as others already going back and forth. And I want to try this again. You say that the Secretary supports what General Odierno has done, which is for all Army personnel. So if he supports it, he supports it. I mean, otherwise he doesn't, and he's going to reverse it. Which is it?
He supports this decision for Major General Williams and his team and what they're going through right now. But as the Secretary of Defense, he reserves the right, and it's his responsibility, to determine whether this should be applied across the force. And he's got the recommendation, he'll review it, and he'll make a decision.
So to be clear, your statement that he supports it right now, just to make sure I'm understanding.
He's not going, let me put it another way. He's not going to oppose or get in the way of the decision that Army leadership made with respect to this group of soldiers coming back. He's not going to...
What you're saying then, please, what you are saying then is that Secretary Hagel only supports this. You've said it several times now, it's just taken me a while to realize it. That Secretary Hagel only supports this for General Williams and his team. He is not, you are not making a statement that Secretary Hagel supports what General Odierno has done for all Army forces returning from Africa?
The Secretary is not going to is not going to oppose this initial decision made by Army leadership. He's reviewing the recommendation, and he'll have a decision soon, and then we'll go from there.
Does he support it only for General Williams and his team, or does he support what General Odierno has done for all Army forces returning?
I think
from
I've
Africa?
answered the question.
No, I'm sorry, I don't understand.
I have answered the question 7 times, Barb.
Admiral Kirby, you have limited it to General Williams. I'm asking you, does Secretary Hagel support General Odierno in terms of all Army personnel going into 21 days of monitoring?
The Secretary supports the decision that was made for General Williams and his team. He's not going to oppose at this time the decision made by Army leadership for all soldiers. That said, he has the recommendation of the Joint Chiefs. He's going to review it, and he'll make a decision. I can't make it any plainer than that. Next question.
I mean, to what extent do you think that this decision by the Army undermines the messaging that you've had and others have had, saying these troops are not exposed to any risk? I mean, they're being isolated in a way that goes well beyond scientific guidelines and recommendations that the President himself has been espousing. So, you know, doesn't this send a message to troops' families that these guys are in much greater danger than has been admitted publicly before?
I think, again, I can't speak for the decision made by the military leadership. I just can't do that. My understanding is this was done out of an abundance of caution to be prudent, and because this was the first installment of troops to come back. I think it was, there was an abundance of caution applied to this. And just let me finish. And then we'll see whether this is the right protocol moving forward for everybody. I mean, I think we're just going to have to see.
But since there's no science to back up what appears to be happening, the question is there more happening in Liberia than we're aware of that would justify this decision?
I'm not aware of anything more that's happening. I think it's important to remind nothing has changed about the fact that these troops, our troops in Liberia, are not going to be treating Ebola patients. They're not going to be coming in direct contact with people who have the disease. They are engineers, logisticians, Seabees, aviators. And so that nothing has changed about that. And nothing has changed about the fact that we hold their safety and their security to be our prime responsibility, and the Secretary is very committed to that. Again, I think we just, he's got the recommendation, he'll consider it, and then we'll go from there. But I don't think this says anything other than the fact that Army leadership had a concern about their safety and the safety of their families, and they acted on that.
What is that safety concern for safety based on? If it's not based on science, then what is it based on?
Based on, again, an abundance of caution for this first group coming back. Look, and the other thing I'd say, Phil, is we always reserve the right to refine our procedures and our protocols. So things could still change further. I don't know. I mean, the Secretary's got to consider this. But one of the things we're good at is changing and tacking if we need to. And the Army made this decision. We'll see where it goes from here.
So doesn't each service chief have the authority to increase, to change this, the rules for their own individual services? So if the Air Force decides, General Welsh could say the same thing, the 21-day applies to all airmen coming back, and so on and so on. So even if Secretary Hagel does not sign off on this, couldn't each of the service chiefs still implement these same rules that the Army has implemented for their...
The service chiefs have wide latitude to do what they need to do for force protection. That's true. And they can be more conservative usually than whatever the standard is, the floor is. What we're talking about here is, does the floor need to be raised or not? And the Secretary gets to make that call for the entire department.
But each of the service chiefs did agree that the floor does need to be raised. They do need to have a 21-day quarantine, correct?
My understanding is that, yeah, well, I said in my opening statement.
So at this point, it stands to reason that that's going to happen, because even if the Secretary doesn't sign
let's
off on it...
not get ahead of a decision that hasn't been made yet.
So-
Julian?
Given that there is apparently additional fears of Ebola exposure, given the 21-day quarantine or controlled monitoring for the Army soldiers, is there any rethinking about the protective gear that soldiers who are deploying and working there are going to be wearing? I know they're not supposed to be in contact with Ebola patients, but clearly there's a fear that they might be. Are you going to upgrade their protective gear that they wear on a daily basis?
I know of no plans to do that, Julian. Again, to remind, Our U.S. troops that are down there are working on 4 lines of effort: command and control, training, logistics, and engineering. That has not changed. There's no plans to have them in direct contact with Ebola patients. We're going to constantly monitor their health while they're down there, routinely and regularly. And regardless of what final decision gets made about the return, the post-deployment, they'll obviously be monitored and assessed going forward after they come home. Whatever that protocol ends up looking like, it's going to result in some monitoring and assessment, obviously, for at least 21 days. So no, I know of no plans to change their kit necessarily because of the work that they're doing.
Seems logical if you're going to extend the monitoring, if there are additional fears, that you might want to also do additional protections. It seems like a similar impetus.
But your question, suggests additional fears. I'm not aware of any additional fears. To Phil's question, this was out of prudence and caution, and a conservative approach. It's not atypical for military commanders to take a conservative approach when it comes to force protection. That's what you want. That's what you would expect. But it doesn't indicate additional fears, as you put it. John.
Kirby, can you give us some insight into the living conditions of these troops that have been quarantined or monitored or whatever you want to call it? I mean, are they still doing work of some kind? Do they have any entertainment, or are they just sort of sitting there staring at a wall for the next 3 weeks?
I can answer that question just obliquely because I don't have the exact details of their life right now. As I understand it, they are isolated, not in contact with other individuals or their families, at least not person to person. I think they're in contact through electronic means, obviously, with their loved ones, of course. And that they do have access to recreational activities and the ability to exercise. I'm told they're eating well, and they have television, and they're subsisting quite well, is what I understand. But I don't know exactly where they all are and what the physical infrastructure looks like.
Just a quick follow-up. If these quarantine procedures are kept in place, would this all take place overseas, or potentially would troops returning to the U.S. be isolated, somewhere on a U.S. base or another military facility?
Well, this kind of gets to Bob's question. I think there's a lot of detail and spade work that still has to be done, John, to work through this. Again, let's keep in mind where we are in the process. There's a recommendation, Secretary's considering it, and then we'll go from there.
When did you get the recommendation, by the way?
Today. Yeah, Craig?
In their recommendation that the chiefs made to the Secretary, did they explain in that why they're going beyond the CDC guidelines?
I won't detail the correspondence between the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary. I think what I would say is that they made plain their concerns and the reasons why they felt the way they did.
And to clarify, you said the reason Odierno made his decision is because this was the first batch. I don't have abundance of caution, but the chiefs are talking about a recommendation for all forces here on out, not just first batch. Is that correct? So, but again, you don't know why they're making that recommendation to the Secretary?
I do know why, Craig, but I'm not going to detail recommendations, specifics of recommendations made by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Secretary of Defense. That's not my place. I wouldn't do that.
Can I follow up on that?
But did they make their points? Did they make their arguments clear? Yes, they did.
So did they address the CDC guidelines and why they aren't adhering to those?
I don't. Again, Craig, I'm just not going to get into specific details about a recommendation from the Joint Chiefs directly to the Secretary. That wouldn't be appropriate. They made plain their concerns.
But this will presumably affect others. I mean, what the military decides on this will weigh in on how scientists, health workers, journalists, people who aren't in the military, I imagine that's going to have at least an indirect influence over others in the country and how they're treated. Why would the military not come up, describe their rationale for this kind of decision?
I didn't say they didn't describe the rationale. I said I wasn't going to detail it, but the recommendation is about U.S. military troops and only U.S. military troops. That's it. And the Joint Chiefs get paid to look after their troops and their families. That's their job. And the recommendation was in that vein and in that light. It wasn't meant to drive any other public discussion or debate. It wasn't meant to to challenge the opinions or other protocols of other agencies, inside or outside government. It was simply meant to address their concerns about their people and their families.
May I follow up? And I do have to follow up on what he's asking you. The Pentagon has said from the beginning that the Ebola program is not classified. I understand that you do not talk about recommendations made in the tank to the Secretary of Defense, but the U.S. military exists as a public entity in this country. So is the Pentagon just simply going to continue to refuse to say publicly, since everyone is concerned about Ebola, why the Joint Chiefs of Staff are making this recommendation? Can you say whether there is any science behind it, or is it just something they want to do?
Barb, you'll find this answer completely unsatisfying, but I'll try it anyway. I speak for Secretary Hagel and for the Defense Department. I do not speak for Chairman Dempsey or the Joint Chiefs. I will not from this podium detail specific recommendations that the Joint Chiefs make to the Secretary of Defense. It would be completely inappropriate. It's not about whether it's classified or not. It's inappropriate, and I won't do that. I've already provided much more detail than I normally would by acknowledging that the recommendation exists and what it basically came down and said. Normally, I wouldn't even go that far, but it had already been out in the media space in such a way that it was unavoidable. I didn't even like doing that much. I just simply can't, go beyond that.
Can Defense Secretary Hagel talk about what they are telling him? The Joint Chiefs exist as part of this country and as part of the public concern. There are thousands of military families and people all over the country concerned. You are discussing a matter that is outside the mainstream of what the CDC is saying, outside of what the White House is saying, outside of what most public health professionals in this country are saying. And people, I think it's fair to say, would be very interested to know what material Secretary Hagel is reviewing that leads him to support, which is what you said, a mandatory 21-day quarantine for military people who are part of this country. They do not exist in isolation.
I said he supports this initial decision made for General Williams and his team. I did not say he supports.
You said for the whole Army.
I said he wasn't at a position now where he would oppose that decision. That said, he hasn't made a decision about implementing this force-wide. And I'm not going to close down the decision space for the Secretary at this point in time. He hasn't made a decision. Now, there are lots of things that go to the Secretary's desk from the Joint Chiefs of Staff every single day. And we don't get up here at the podium and talk about those things, whether they're classified or not. It's just not appropriate, and I'm not going to go in there. Now, once the Secretary makes a decision, I will come up here and I will explain it, and you'll have all the detail about what decision he made and why he made it. But until there's been a decision made by the Secretary of Defense for the United States of America, there's really nothing more to say. It's a recommendation. He's considering it. We'll go from there. Yes, in the back.
Thanks, Admiral Kirby. 2 quick ones. Can I go to ISIL? Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, that would be a welcome break.
So my first question is, do you have an update on cost for us? And then the follow-up to that is, do you have anything on the 150 Peshmerga fighters that have crossed into Turkey and how the U.S. might coordinate since they're heading to Kobani?
There's been no change to the estimated cost. It's still around, I think we said 8.3 last week, earlier this week, and that's about where it still is. So it's still in that 7 to 10 range that I've talked about before, $1 million per day. And I can get you, I think I have a total figure if you need that, because I know now I have to have that. Let's see where it is. So a total of $580 million since the start of airstrikes on August 8th. I don't have an update on the Peshmerga, or the Peshmerga fighters that you're talking about. I just don't have anything operationally on that today. Yeah, Christina.
On ISIS, does the department anticipate forwarding a request for additional money to Congress for 2015 for the ISIS fight?
I think you've heard Secretary Hagel and the chairman talk about this. I think certainly there's going to have to be some considerations going forward, but I wouldn't get ahead of specific budget moves that haven't been made yet. I think we've gone to the Hill, we've testified to the operations, and I think again, Secretary Hagel's been very clear that certainly considerations for added funding are going to have to be part of the calculus going forward, but we're just not in a position right now where we could detail what that would look like, what form it would be, how much it would be, that kind of thing.
And then, secondly, in light of General Allen's remarks on stemming ISIS's online propaganda, what is the department seeing in terms of recruitment for ISIS since military action began, U.S. military action began?
Well, we don't have the methods to garner great specificity about their recruiting efforts. We still believe that they are able to recruit and continue to recruit. They are facing some attrition, obviously, through these operations, not just from the air but from the ground. But there's no question that they still possess the ability to reconstitute their manpower, and that's just, again, that's an indication of the strength of their ideology right now, which is why we're working hard to counter that, and the fact that this is going to be a long struggle.
It's hard to quantify, but are we seeing an increase in recruitment for ISIS?
I just can't give you a measure right now, Christina, and I don't know that we really would be able to do that with any great accuracy. They do continue to recruit. There's no question about that, and we know they have the ability to reconstitute some of the manpower that they've lost. But again, that's an indication that this is just going to take time. This ideology is very attractive to some young men, and it's going to take time to get after that. David?
Is there a clock ticking on Hagel's Ebola decision? In other words, is there a planned redeployment of troops that would force the issue the way that the return of Williams and his staff forced the issue for Odierno?
No. No, I think you. I think well, I don't think he's going to dawdle over this decision. I think he'll make a decision very soon. But no, there's not a hard clock in terms of another set coming back that's going to drive him artificially to an answer. He's got the recommendation. He got it today. I'm confident that he will come to a decision very soon, and then we'll disclose what that is. Yeah.
Admiral, you say you can't talk about the Joint Chiefs recommendation, but can you offer any insight into what the Secretary's thinking is? Does he have any particular concerns? Why is he not approving the recommendation outright?
Well, Andrew, he just got it today, so within just a few hours ago. So it's not like he's delaying or anything like that. I'm not going to get ahead of a decision that he hasn't made. I don't think that would be appropriate. No.
Can I ask you a different way? Is he concerned that his decision, whether he likes it or not, is going to have serious influence on the public debate, which is based in large part on fear right now? I know you say your decision is not based on fear, but could the public interpret it that way, and is that playing into his decision?
I think it's safe to say that he's considering a number of factors as he weighs the decision, and certainly the spillover effect, to Craig's question, the spillover effect on other agencies and the American people certainly are on his mind. But his primary responsibility is to take care of the Defense Department, our troops, and our families, and that's always been foremost in his mind. And that will, I'm sure, be the most significant factor as he weighs the decision. Yeah.
Some reports from Iraqi Kurdish regional, particularly Iraq Kurdistan region, say that the U.S. is going to establish a military base in Arbil. Can you confirm this, Admiral?
No, I don't have anything for you on that today. Sorry. I'll take one more. Louis?
There was an ISIS propaganda video that was released yesterday. Do you have any information that would suggest that it was authentic? And it also named you by name, citing mistruths about this ongoing situation there. Do you have any comment on that?
We were analyzing the video as we do when they release these kinds of propaganda videos. So we're still in the process of assessing it, its validity. I don't have any indication. I've seen no indications that that would tell us it's not authentic and that it wasn't shot the way it was appeared to have been shot. And as for specific mention to me, no, I don't have any comment on that. I would. The only thing I would add, though, is that this is just another example of the barbarity of these people. That they're taking a hostage, a man they've taken captive, and obviously forcing this individual to do this video. I mean, it's just another example of their depravity. But beyond that, I don't think I'll comment. Thanks, everybody.